He adopted a lost Apache child, then met her widow mother. Thomas had lived all his life near the wide desert. The town where he lived was small and quiet. People knew each other by name, and everyone relied on the land to survive. Thomas worked at a local ranch where he cared for horses and cattle. His days were long and filled with hard work, but he loved the calm of the desert, the sound of the wind over the rocks, and the soft golden light of the sun as it rose and set. One evening, just as the sun was slipping behind the hills, Thomas was checking the fields. He walked slowly along the edges of the ranch, looking for any lost cattle. The air was warm and the shadows were growing longer. Suddenly he noticed movement near a pile of rocks. He froze and watched carefully. There, huddled against the stones, was a small girl. She was no more than 6 or 7 years old. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her hair was tangled and dirty. Her eyes were wide, and she looked frightened. Thomas approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Hello," he said gently. "My name is Thomas. Are you okay?" The girl did not answer. She only hugged her knees and shook her head. Thomas could see she was hungry and scared. He took out a bottle of water from his bag and held it out. "Do you want some water?" he asked softly. She hesitated, but eventually reached for the bottle. Thomas handed it to her. She drank slowly, her hands shaking as she held the water. For the next few days, Thomas did his best to care for her. He gave her warm food and clean clothes. He built a small bed for her in a quiet corner of his home. She was shy and did not speak much, but Thomas was patient. He knew she had been through a lot. Every time she looked at him with her big dark eyes, he felt a mix of sadness and hope. He decided to name her Little Star, because her eyes reminded him of the bright stars that shone over the desert at night. Thomas noticed that Little Star loved to watch the animals. She would sit quietly for hours, watching the chickens pecking the ground, the horses grazing, and the rabbits hopping through the grass. Sometimes she would laugh quietly, a soft musical sound that made Thomas smile. He began to tell her stories about the desert, about the mountains, the animals, and the stars. Little Star listened carefully, and soon she began to respond, asking questions, and even trying to repeat some words. Though she was still very shy, Thomas could see that Little Star was strong and smart. She learned quickly how to help with small tasks around the ranch. She would carry water to the chickens, help gather eggs, and even feed the horses. Thomas encouraged her, always praising her for her efforts. "You are very brave, Little Star," he would say. "You are learning so fast." The townspeople began to notice the bond between Thomas and Little Star. Some were curious, others were impressed by Thomas's kindness. They could see that he cared for her deeply, and they respected him for it. Thomas did not mind the attention. He was more concerned about making sure Little Star felt safe and loved. One evening, after a long day of work, Thomas and Little Star sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Little Star leaned against Thomas, feeling safe for the first time in a long while. "Do you have a family?" Thomas asked gently. Little Star shook her head. She did not answer, but she squeezed his hand, as if saying she trusted him. Thomas thought about what had happened to her. How had a little girl ended up alone in the desert? He did not know the full story, and he did not ask too many questions. He knew that what she needed now was care, love, and patience, and he was determined to give her all three. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Little Star began to adjust to her new life. She started to smile more often, to laugh, and even to play. Thomas bought her a small doll, and she named it Moon. She would carry Moon everywhere, telling the doll stories just like Thomas told her stories. She began to speak a few words, and Thomas was amazed at how quickly she was learning. Thomas taught her how to ride a horse. At first, Little Star was scared. The horse was so much bigger than her, and the desert wind made her nervous. But Thomas stayed close, holding her steady and encouraging her. Soon she was riding around the ranch laughing and calling out to the animals. Thomas watched her with pride. He had never seen anyone so determined and brave. Even at night, Thomas made sure little Star felt safe. He would read her stories by the fire, telling tales of desert animals, the stars, and faraway lands. Sometimes she would fall asleep listening to his voice. Other times, she would ask questions about the world outside the desert, about life, and about people. Thomas answered carefully, always trying to encourage her curiosity while protecting her from fears she was not ready to face. Thomas knew that little Star had a past, a family somewhere, and he worried about what would happen if she were ever found. But he did not let that fear show. He focused on the present, on giving her the love and care she needed. He believed that if she grew up strong and happy, the past could be healed one day. One morning, Thomas woke to find little Star sitting on the porch, looking at the horizon. She had a small smile on her face, and her eyes were full of wonder. Thomas joined her, and they watched the desert together in silence. No words were needed. They understood each other. As weeks passed, little Star became part of the community. The local children began to play with her, and she learned to speak with them. She laughed more, shared stories, and slowly became the happy little girl she was meant to be. Thomas continued to support her, helping her navigate the world outside the ranch while keeping her safe from harm. Every day, Thomas felt a deep bond with little Star. He loved her as if she were his own daughter. And little Star, in her quiet way, began to love him too. She trusted him, and that trust grew into something strong, something unbreakable. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the stars began to shine, Thomas thought about how a small, frightened girl had come into his life. He realized that finding little Star was no accident. It had changed both of their lives. She had brought joy, laughter, and purpose to his days. And he had given her safety, love, and hope. Together, they were creating a new family, built not just by blood but by care, trust, and compassion. Thomas knew that the desert was vast and full of mysteries, but he also knew that with patience and love, even the smallest, most lost child could find her place in the world. And little Star had found hers, right there, with him, under the wide, starry desert sky. Little Star had begun to settle into her new life at the ranch. Each morning the sunlight poured over the desert, and she would wake to the soft sounds of birds and the faint rustle of the wind through the dry grass. She learned to stretch and yawn in the warmth of the rising sun, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Thomas would quietly enter her small room to check on her, making sure she was awake and ready for the day. He never rushed her. He knew she needed time to feel secure and comfortable. Breakfast was a special time for both of them. Thomas made simple meals of eggs, bread, and sometimes fresh fruit from the small garden he tended. Little Star would sit at the table, carefully peeling fruit or breaking bread with her small hands. At first she ate quietly, barely speaking. But as the days passed, she began to answer Thomas when he asked questions, using a few words at a time. "Good morning," she said softly one day. Thomas smiled, feeling his heart swell. "Good morning, little Star," he replied warmly. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, her small face brightening. After breakfast, Thomas began teaching little Star simple chores around the ranch. He wanted her to feel useful and confident. She learned how to feed the chickens, collect the eggs, and carry water from the well. At first she struggled, spilling water or dropping eggs by accident. Thomas would patiently show her again, saying, "It is okay. Everyone learns slowly at first. You are doing very well." His encouragement gave her courage, and soon she became more careful and precise. She learned to tie knots, mend fences, and even sweep the floors of the small house. Little Star loved spending time with the animals. She was fascinated by the horses, especially a gentle brown mare named Cinnamon. Thomas showed her how to brush Cinnamon's coat, feed her oats, and eventually how to ride her. Little Star was nervous at first, unsure of how to balance herself on the large animal. Thomas stayed close, holding her steady and explaining each movement. "Relax, little Star. Cinnamon will not hurt you. Trust her, and trust yourself." Gradually her fear faded. She began to laugh as Cinnamon walked calmly under her, the wind blowing through her hair. Riding brought her a sense of freedom she had never felt before, and she began to look forward to each lesson. In the afternoons, Thomas would tell her stories. They would sit together on a blanket outside, the desert stretching endlessly before them. Thomas spoke of the stars, the animals, and the history of the land. Little Star loved these stories. She would listen with wide eyes, asking questions about the animals, the plants, and the people who lived in the nearby towns. "How do the rabbits find their homes?" she asked one day. Thomas smiled. "They use their senses and remember the paths. Just like you are learning to remember your own paths, Little Star." She giggled at this, feeling proud that she could learn new things each day. Little Star's curiosity grew quickly. She began exploring small areas of the ranch with Thomas nearby. She would watch the chickens chase each other, notice the different colors of flowers, and sometimes even try to imitate the birds' calls. Thomas encouraged her curiosity. "The world is full of wonders," he told her, "and you are very clever for noticing them." She beamed with pride, feeling that she was important and capable. As she became more confident, Little Star also began to form friendships with the other children in the town. At first she was shy and would watch them from a distance. Thomas gently encouraged her to join them, assuring her that it was okay to be nervous. Gradually she began playing simple games with the children, laughing and running with them across the open fields. She learned to share, take turns, and express herself through play. Thomas watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that she was learning not only skills, but also the joy of being part of a community. Evenings at the ranch became a time of reflection and bonding. Thomas and Little Star would sit by the fire, sometimes roasting small pieces of bread or marshmallows. Little Star would talk about the day, describing the chores she had done, the animals she had watched, or the games she had played. Thomas listened carefully, responding with praise and gentle advice. "You worked very hard today, Little Star. I am proud of you," he said one night. She smiled shyly, feeling a warm glow of happiness. One day Thomas decided it was time to teach Little Star about the desert itself. He led her on a small hike, showing her the different plants, rocks, and animal tracks. He explained how the desert could be harsh, but also beautiful. "The desert is strong, Little Star," he said. "And so are you. You survived even when it was hard. And now you are learning to live with strength and courage." Little Star listened carefully, absorbing every word. She began to understand that she had a new life filled with possibilities, and that she was no longer alone. Little Star also started helping Thomas in the garden. She learned how to plant seeds, water them, and care for the growing vegetables. She was fascinated by how small seeds could grow into plants, just like she was learning to grow in her new life. Thomas explained, "Life takes time, patience, and care. Just like these plants, you are growing stronger and healthier each day." She smiled at this, understanding the meaning behind his words. At night, when the stars filled the sky, Little Star would sometimes speak of the past in small, broken sentences. She missed her family and wondered where they were. Thomas listened patiently, never interrupting, and always reassuring her. "It is okay to remember," he said softly. "The past is part of you, but you are safe now, and you have people who care for you." These words comforted Little Star, giving her hope that even though her past had been difficult, her present was filled with kindness and love. As the days passed, Thomas noticed a change in Little Star. She laughed more freely, spoke more confidently, and even began to express herself through small drawings and songs. She would draw pictures of the animals she loved, the desert landscapes she had explored, and sometimes pictures of people she hoped to see again. Thomas would look at these drawings with pride, telling her, "These are beautiful, Little Star. You have a wonderful imagination." Thomas also encouraged Little Star to rest and take care of herself. He taught her the importance of sleeping well, eating healthy food, and taking time to enjoy the little moments in life. They would sometimes lie on the grass together, watching clouds drift across the sky and talking quietly about their dreams. Little Star began to feel a sense of peace she had never known before. She realized that life could be gentle and kind, even after so many hard experiences. One afternoon, a neighbor came to visit. She brought fresh bread and a warm smile, greeting Little Star kindly. At first, Little Star hid behind Thomas, unsure of strangers. But Thomas encouraged her to greet the neighbor. Slowly, she stepped forward, offering a small, shy smile. The neighbor knelt down to her level, speaking softly. "Hello, little star. It is nice to meet you." Little Star felt a rush of happiness. She realized that people could be kind, and that she could trust them too. Over time, Little Star became a small but important part of the community. People admired her courage and intelligence. They noticed how quickly she learned new skills and how she began to interact with others. Thomas felt proud, but he also remained humble. He knew that the most important thing he had given her was love and stability. That was something no one else could teach, and it was the foundation on which Little Star's new life was being built. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Little Star sat on the porch with Thomas. She leaned against him and looked out at the desert, her eyes reflecting the orange and pink hues of the sky. "Thomas," she said softly, "I like it here. I am happy." Thomas smiled, feeling a deep warmth in his heart. "I am happy too, Little Star," he said. "You deserve to be happy. You are safe now, and you are loved." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Thomas and Little Star sat together in quiet contentment. The desert was calm, the wind whispering softly through the rocks. Little Star felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. She was no longer just a lost child. She was part of a family, part of a community, and part of a world that cared for her. And Thomas knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning of a life filled with hope, courage, and love. Life on the ranch had settled into a gentle rhythm for Thomas and Little Star. Each day brought new lessons, laughter, and small adventures. Little Star had grown more confident, learning to care for animals, ride horses, and even help Thomas with small tasks around the house. She had started to speak more clearly, ask questions, and even express herself through small drawings and songs. Thomas was proud of her progress, but he never let her forget that there was still more to learn, not just about the world, but also about the strength inside her. One warm afternoon, Thomas decided to take Little Star on a walk near the edge of the desert. The sun was bright, and the wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush. Little Star walked carefully beside him, carrying a small basket with water and some bread for a picnic. "Today we are going to explore the canyon," Thomas said with a smile. Little Star's eyes widened with excitement. She had never been so far from the ranch before. "Will we see animals?" she asked eagerly. Thomas nodded. "Very likely. Keep your eyes open, and remember to stay close to me." As they walked, Thomas pointed out the small signs of life in the desert. He showed Little Star the tracks of rabbits, coyotes, and birds. He explained how each animal found food, shelter, and safety. Little Star listened carefully, asking questions and pointing to tracks she noticed. "That one looks like a fox," she said quietly. Thomas smiled. "Good eye. You are learning quickly. The desert has many secrets, and you are noticing them all." Little Star beamed at the praise, feeling proud of herself. They stopped at a flat area near the canyon, where the sun cast long shadows over the rocks. Thomas spread out a small blanket, and they sat down to eat their simple meal. Little Star carefully took out the bread and water, sharing a small piece with Cinnamon, the horse that had followed them along the path. As they ate, Thomas told her stories of the desert at night, the stars, the animals that came out after dark, and the mysteries hidden in the shadows. Little Star listened intently, her imagination painting pictures of the world he described. After the meal, Thomas suggested they explore a narrow path that led further into the canyon. Little Star followed closely, holding his hand as they walked along the rocky trail. Suddenly she froze. Ahead on the trail was a figure on horseback. The figure wore traditional clothes, brightly colored and decorated, and moved with careful control. Little Star's heart began to beat faster. She had never seen anyone like this before, and something about the figure seemed familiar. The rider slowed down and called out softly, "Little Star?" The girl's eyes widened, and she instinctively clung to Thomas. Thomas stopped, carefully assessing the situation. He noticed the woman's eyes, deep, filled with worry, yet gentle. There was a sadness there, but also hope. The woman dismounted slowly, keeping her hands visible to show she meant no harm. "Little star, it's me," she said again, her voice trembling. "It's really me. I've been searching for you." Little Star stared at the woman, unsure what to do. Thomas knelt beside her, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Little Star," he said softly. "She is here to see you." "Take your time." The girl's small hands clutched his shirt as she studied the woman. There was something in the woman's eyes that felt familiar, something warm and comforting. Slowly, she took a small step forward. The woman knelt down on the ground to meet Little Star at her level. Her eyes filled with tears as she spoke. "I am your mother," she said softly. "I have searched everywhere for you. I never stopped hoping I would find you again." Little Star's lips trembled, and for a moment, she could not speak. She looked from Thomas to the woman, confused and unsure. Thomas smiled reassuringly, encouraging her to feel safe in this new, emotional moment. The woman, Ayanna, as Thomas would later learn, told Little Star that she had been lost during a journey through the desert. A severe storm had separated them, and despite searching for days, she had been unable to find her daughter. Over the years, she had traveled many miles, asked every traveler, and even left messages in nearby towns. Every day had been filled with worry and longing. And now, finally, she had found Little Star. Little Star's small hand slowly reached toward Ayanna. She touched her mother's face, feeling the warmth and softness of her skin. Ayanna held her daughter gently, as if she were afraid to let go. "I never gave up," she whispered. "I never stopped looking for you." Thomas watched quietly, feeling a deep mix of joy and sadness. He realized that his role in Little Star's life had been important, but this reunion was something far greater. A mother finally finding her child. For several moments, the three of them sat in silence, letting the emotions settle. Little Star's eyes flicked from Ayanna to Thomas. She felt love and safety from both of them, and in that moment she understood that her world had grown bigger, not smaller. She was loved by the man who had cared for her when she was alone, and by the mother who had searched for her tirelessly. Thomas stood up and gently encouraged the women to speak alone for a while. "I will wait over here," he said softly. "Take your time." Little Star nodded, and with a shy smile stepped closer to her mother. Ayanna held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. She whispered words of comfort, telling her daughter that she was safe, loved, and that nothing could harm her now. Little Star, feeling the warmth of her mother's embrace, finally let herself cry, releasing the fear and loneliness she had carried for so long. As the sun began to set, Thomas watched from a short distance away. The canyon was quiet, except for the gentle sounds of wind and rustling leaves. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. He had given Little Star safety and care when she needed it most, but now he realized that life had a way of returning people to where they belonged. This meeting between mother and daughter was more than a coincidence. It was a reminder that hope and persistence could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. Little Star and Ayanna spent hours together that evening. The mother asked about her daughter's experiences, what she had learned and how she had lived. Little Star spoke slowly at first, describing Thomas, the ranch, the animals, and the lessons she had learned. Ayanna listened with awe and gratitude, realizing how much her daughter had grown and how strong she had become despite the hardships. She thanked Thomas over and over, her voice full of emotion. "You kept her safe," she said. "You gave her love when I could not." "I am forever grateful." Thomas shook his head humbly. "It was my honor," he said. "She is a brave, wonderful child. I only helped her in small ways." Ayanna smiled through her tears, realizing that Thomas had not only cared for her daughter, but had also become a meaningful part of her life. Little Star, too, began to understand the special bond she had formed with Thomas. He had been her protector, her teacher, and her friend. And though she now had her mother, she knew Thomas would always remain an important part of her life. As night fell, the three of them returned to the ranch. Ayanna decided to stay nearby for a while, wanting to rebuild the bond with her daughter and understand the life she had been living. Little Star held both Thomas's hand and her mother's hand as they walked, feeling the strength of the support surrounding her. She realized that she no longer needed to fear the world. She had people who cared deeply for her, and that knowledge filled her with a quiet, steady happiness. Thomas helped Little Star and Ayanna settle in for the night. He made sure Little Star had a comfortable bed and that Ayanna had a place to rest nearby. He stayed a short distance away, giving them space while remaining close enough in case they needed him. Little Star looked at Thomas before closing her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas smiled softly. "I will always be here for you, Little Star. Remember that." She nodded, feeling a warm comfort she had never felt before. That night the desert sky was filled with stars, bright and endless. Little Star lay in her bed, thinking about the day's events. She had met her mother, felt her embrace, and understood that she was no longer alone. Thomas's presence reminded her of the safety and care that had carried her through the hardest days, and for the first time she felt a sense of completeness. Her past and present were coming together to form a life filled with love, hope, and possibility. In the quiet of the night, Thomas reflected on the events of the day as well. He realized that life had given him a remarkable gift, the chance to care for a lost child and then witness the reunion of a mother and daughter. It was a reminder that love, patience, and kindness could create miracles, even in the harshest conditions, and he knew that Little Star's journey was only beginning, with both her mother and himself walking beside her, guiding her toward a bright and hopeful future. The days after Little Star's reunion with her mother, Ayanna, were filled with new experiences, emotions, and small adjustments. Life at the ranch continued as usual, but now there was a new presence, her mother, walking alongside her, guiding her, and slowly reclaiming the role she had longed to hold. Little Star felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. She loved Thomas, who had cared for her when she was alone, but she also longed to know her mother, to feel the warmth and protection only a parent could provide. Ayanna spent the first morning helping Little Star with her daily chores. She showed her how to gather water, feed the animals, and tend the small garden. Little Star watched carefully, eager to learn, but also shy. She had grown used to Thomas's gentle instructions and calm patience, and now Ayanna's approach was different, filled with love, but also a quiet intensity that showed the responsibility she felt for her daughter. Thomas stayed nearby, smiling and quietly encouraging Little Star. "Take your time," he said softly. "Your mother is learning about you as much as you are learning about her." As the days passed, Little Star began to feel more comfortable with her mother. They would sit together on the porch in the early morning, sipping water and watching the desert slowly wake with the rising sun. Ayanna shared stories of their family, stories of the past filled with both joy and hardship. Little Star listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the life her mother had lived before she had been lost. Each story gave her a sense of belonging she had never known, a connection to a family and culture that was now a part of her identity. Ayanna also wanted to know about Thomas and the life he had given Little Star. She asked her daughter to tell her everything, the animals she had cared for, the games she had played, and the lessons she had learned. Little Star spoke eagerly, excited to share the adventures and small achievements that had made her days bright. Thomas watched quietly from a short distance, feeling both pride and a sense of peaceful detachment. He knew that his role was slowly shifting, making space for the mother-daughter bond to grow. Thomas remained close, however, offering support when needed. He taught Ayanna small ways to make Little Star feel comfortable in her care. "She is brave," he explained, "but she needs patience. Let her take small steps. Give her time to trust you fully. She has grown strong from being alone, and now she needs your love to guide her further." Ayanna nodded, listening carefully. She realized that Thomas's presence had been a bridge between her past and present, helping her daughter survive until she could be reunited with her. Little Star and Ayanna began spending more time together, exploring the ranch and the surrounding desert. They would walk along the paths Thomas had shown Little Star, pointing out animal tracks, interesting plants, and hidden corners of the canyon. Little Star loved these walks, but she often glanced at Thomas for reassurance. He would nod or smile. silently giving her permission to trust her mother. Gradually, she stopped seeking constant reassurance, learning that Ayana's guidance was gentle and reliable. Meals became a shared experience filled with conversation and laughter. Ayana introduced simple traditional food she remembered from her own childhood. Little Star was fascinated by the flavors and textures, eager to learn how to prepare them herself. Together they cooked small meals, Ayana guiding Little Star's small hands with care. Thomas sometimes joined, offering advice or helping to chop vegetables, but always in a way that allowed the mother-daughter bond to grow. Little Star felt a new sense of pride, learning to create meals not only for herself, but also for her family. As Little Star's confidence grew, she began to express herself more openly with her mother. She shared her thoughts, feelings, and fears, slowly revealing the loneliness she had felt before Thomas had found her. Ayana listened carefully, never judging, always reassuring. "You were brave," she told her daughter one evening. "You survived and you learned so much. I am proud of you, Little Star. And now we can face the future together." Little Star smiled, feeling the warmth of a mother's pride fill her heart. Thomas encouraged these moments, knowing how important they were. He gave them privacy when they needed it, but remained nearby as a steady presence. Little Star sometimes ran to him during moments of hesitation, needing the comfort of the man who had cared for her through the loneliest times. Thomas would hug her gently, whispering, "You are loved by both of us. You are safe." These words reinforced her growing sense of security and belonging, making the transition smoother. One day, Ayana decided it was time for Little Star to learn more about her own culture and traditions. She taught her simple songs in their language, stories of their ancestors, and small customs that were part of daily life. Little Star listened carefully, fascinated by the connection between the land, the people, and the stories that had been passed down for generations. Thomas encouraged these lessons, explaining that understanding one's roots was as important as learning practical skills.
The three of them, Little Star, Ayana, and Thomas, began to spend afternoons together exploring not just the ranch, but the surrounding desert.
They watched the wildlife, studied plants, and sometimes paused to rest in the shade of a large rock. Little Star learned to recognize different birds, understand the movements of rabbits, and even spot distant footprints of coyotes and foxes. She loved these lessons, feeling proud of her ability to understand the world around her. Evenings were often quiet and reflective. They would sit on the porch, watching the sunset over the desert, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. Little Star would talk about her day, what she had learned, and what she hoped to do tomorrow. Ayana would respond with guidance, encouragement, and love, while Thomas listened quietly, offering his wisdom when needed. These moments became the foundation of a family bond built on trust, care, and shared experiences. Over time, Little Star and Ayana grew closer. They laughed together, cooked together, and shared stories long into the night. Little Star began to rely less on Thomas for reassurance, trusting her mother's guidance and love. Yet she never forgot Thomas's role in her life, the man who had rescued her, taught her, and given her hope. She felt a deep gratitude for him, knowing that he had given her the strength to embrace her mother fully. Ayana, too, found comfort in Thomas's continued presence. She realized that he had been more than a caretaker. He had been a guide, protector, and friend. His kindness had allowed her daughter to survive and thrive. She often thanked him, her voice full of emotion. "You gave her life when I could not. You taught her to be brave and strong. I will never forget what you have done." Thomas would nod humbly, saying, "I only helped." She had the courage inside her all along. Little Star began to explore her creativity more as well. She drew pictures of the ranch, the desert, and the animals she loved. She sang small songs she had learned from Ayana, and even tried writing short words to describe her experiences. Both Ayana and Thomas encouraged these efforts, praising her imagination and helping her improve. Little Star felt proud of herself, knowing that she could express her thoughts and feelings in different ways. At night, when the stars filled the sky, Little Star would sometimes lie between Ayana and Thomas, feeling the warmth of both of them. She realized that she now had a family that cared deeply for her, The love and support she felt gave her courage and confidence she had never known before. She was no longer alone. She had people to guide her, protect her, and share her joys with. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Little Star and Ayanna continued to grow stronger. Little Star learned to cook, ride horses, care for the garden, and understand the desert in ways she never had before. Ayanna became not just her mother, but also her teacher and companion, showing her the traditions, stories, and values of their family. Thomas remained a steady presence, always there to support, guide, and love Little Star in the way only he could. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset together, Little Star realized how much her life had changed. She had gone from being a lost, frightened child to someone who felt loved, capable, and confident. She held both Ayanna's and Thomas's hands and whispered, "Thank you. I am happy now." Ayanna smiled, tears in her eyes, while Thomas nodded quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. They had built a family together, one filled with love, patience, and hope. Little Star knew that the journey was not over. There would be challenges, questions, and moments of uncertainty. But with her mother by her side and Thomas continuing to support her, she felt ready to face the future. For the first time in her young life, she believed in a tomorrow that was safe, bright, and full of possibilities. And that belief filled her heart with joy, courage, and the knowledge that she was truly loved. Little Star had now been reunited with her mother, Ayanna, for several months, and her life had changed in ways she never imagined. The once frightened and lonely girl had grown into a confident, cheerful child. She laughed freely, helped with chores, played with the animals, and even shared her thoughts openly with both her mother and Thomas. The ranch, which had been her sanctuary during the hardest times, was now a place where all three of them felt a sense of home and belonging. Each morning began with the warm light of the desert sun spilling across the house and fields. Little Star would wake to the soft sounds of birds singing, the clinking of buckets as Ayanna collected water, and the quiet footsteps of Thomas tending to the animals. Breakfast had become a joyful ritual. Ayanna would prepare simple but wholesome meals, and Thomas would sit with them, occasionally sharing a story or pointing out an interesting sight from the desert outside. Little Star delighted in these mornings, feeling loved and safe as she ate with the two people who cared for her most. After breakfast, the day was often spent working together on the ranch. Little Star had grown skilled at many tasks, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, watering the garden, and even helping mend fences. Ayanna guided her patiently, showing her how to handle tools, carry heavy buckets, and recognize which plants and animals needed special care. Little Star listened carefully, absorbing every detail and learning quickly. She loved being helpful and proud of herself for doing things she had never imagined she could do. Thomas sometimes worked alongside them, gently offering advice or teaching new skills, always careful to support without taking over. In the afternoons, the three of them would often explore the desert together. They walked along familiar paths, pointing out animal tracks, watching rabbits dart into bushes, or noticing the birds flying high above the cliffs. Thomas would sometimes explain the habits of the animals, teaching Little Star to observe carefully. Ayanna would tell stories of her own childhood in the desert, of family traditions and long journeys, helping Little Star connect with her heritage. The girl loved these moments, feeling a deep connection to both her present and her past. Little Star also enjoyed small adventures on her own, under careful supervision. She would ride Cinnamon, the gentle horse she had grown to love, while Thomas and Ayanna walked beside her, ensuring she stayed safe. At first she had been nervous, worried she might fall or lose control, but her confidence had grown steadily. She would gallop across the fields, laughing loudly, feeling the wind on her face and the power beneath her feet. Thomas would cheer quietly, proud of her courage, while Ayanna's eyes would shine with love and admiration. Evenings were often quiet and reflective. The three of them would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of gold, orange, and purple. Little Star would share the highlights of her day, telling stories of what she had learned, the animals she had seen, or the adventure she had on her horse. Ayanna would respond with warmth and guidance, praising her daughter for her courage and curiosity. Thomas would listen quietly, occasionally offering a gentle comment or story, reinforcing the lessons of the day. These moments became the heart of their family life, filled with love, patience, and understanding. Little Star began to show signs of growing independence. She started organizing her own small activities, deciding which animals to feed first, planning walks through the desert, and even creating her own small drawings of the ranch, the animals, and the landscape. Ayana encouraged her creativity, helping her name the plants and animals in her sketches, while Thomas offered practical advice on how to observe nature more carefully. Little Star loved this, feeling proud that she could contribute ideas and make decisions about her day. At times, Little Star would reflect on her past, the days when she was alone, scared, and uncertain. She would sometimes feel a small pang of sadness, remembering the fear and loneliness she had experienced. But in these moments she also felt gratitude and strength. She had survived, and now she had people who loved her. She had learned that life could be kind, and that she could trust others. These lessons had given her courage, and she faced each new day with hope and joy. Ayana and Thomas worked together to nurture Little Star's growth. They recognized that she needed both guidance and freedom. Ayana focused on teaching her daughter about family, culture, and heritage, while Thomas emphasized practical skills, observation, and kindness to others. Little Star flourished under their combined care. She learned not only how to survive but how to thrive, understanding the balance between independence and connection. As time went on, the bond between Little Star and her mother grew stronger. They shared laughs, stories, and quiet moments under the stars. Little Star loved listening to Ayana talk about her past, about traditions, and the family she had lost. Ayana loved hearing about the time Little Star had spent with Thomas, about the animals she had learned to care for, and the skills she had developed. The two of them slowly built a relationship based on trust, love, and shared experiences. Thomas continued to be a constant presence in their lives. He did not replace Ayana, but he remained a steady source of support and guidance. He celebrated Little Star's accomplishments, comforted her during moments of fear, and offered gentle wisdom. Ayana appreciated his presence and respected the bond he had formed with her daughter. The three of them became a family, united not only by circumstance but by care, patience, and affection. One afternoon, Thomas suggested a small project for Little Star. He showed her a patch of land near the edge of the ranch and said, "This can be your garden. You can plant whatever you like here." Little Star's eyes sparkled. She carefully selected seeds, learning how to plant them in rows, water them, and care for them as they grew. Ayana helped her understand which plants would thrive in the desert climate, and Thomas explained how to observe the soil and sunlight. Little Star felt proud as she worked, watching the tiny seeds transform into healthy sprouts. This garden became a symbol of her growth, resilience, and ability to nurture life. Evenings often ended with storytelling. The three of them would sit under the stars, Thomas telling tales of the desert, animals, and survival, while Ayana shared stories of her ancestors, the traditions they had followed, and the lessons they had learned. Little Star listened intently, imagining herself in the stories, learning the values of bravery, kindness, and patience. She began to create her own small stories, sharing them with Ayana and Thomas, feeling proud that her imagination was valued and celebrated. Little Star also began to form friendships with other children in the town. She invited them to visit the ranch, showing them the garden, the animals, and the small corners of the desert she loved. Ayana and Thomas watched as she interacted confidently, teaching others about the plants and animals she had come to know so well. Little Star felt proud of her knowledge and skills, and the joy of sharing them with friends added another layer of happiness to her life. As months turned into seasons, the family grew stronger together. Little Star learned the rhythm of life on the ranch, the patterns of the desert, and the importance of caring for both people and nature. Ayana regained her confidence as a mother, proud of the strong, intelligent, and kind daughter she had found. Thomas continued to provide support, guidance, and love, knowing that his role, though different now, was still important in Little Star's life. One evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky with shades of pink and gold, Little Star sat between Ayana and Thomas on the porch. She looked up at the stars, thinking about how far she had come. She had gone from being a lost, frightened child to someone who felt loved, confident, and capable. She held the hands of both her mother and Thomas, feeling the warmth and safety of their care. "I am happy," she whispered. Ayana smiled, tears in her eyes, while Thomas nodded quietly, his heart full. Little Star realized that her life had been shaped by love, patience, and courage. She understood that although the past had been difficult, it had taught her strength and resilience. Her mother's love now surrounded her, and Thomas's guidance had given her the tools to thrive. She felt a sense of hope for the future, knowing that she had people who would always care for her, protect her, and support her dreams. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a symbol of life, growth, and beauty. Little Star learned to watch the stars, observe the animals, and appreciate the quiet moments of nature. Each day brought new opportunities to learn, explore, and strengthen her bond with her mother and Thomas. Life, she realized, was filled with challenges, but also with immense joy and love. As night fell, the three of them sat quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the desert. Little Star felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that the journey of her life was still unfolding, but she no longer felt afraid. With her mother and Thomas by her side, she had everything she needed: love, guidance, and a place to call home. The stars above seemed to shine brighter that night, as if celebrating the family that had been formed through patience, courage, and kindness. In the days and years that followed, Little Star continued to grow, surrounded by love and guidance. She learned new skills, explored the world around her, and developed a strong sense of self. Her bond with Ayana deepened, and her relationship with Thomas remained strong and supportive. The three of them lived each day with gratitude, joy, and a shared sense of hope. Little Star's journey had been difficult, but it had led her to a life filled with love, safety, and family. She had learned that even in the harshest conditions, kindness, patience, and courage could create miracles. And under the endless desert sky, with stars shining above, she knew that her story was just beginning, a story filled with love, hope, and the promise of a bright future.